Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Welcome back to The Deal. I'm Jayson Kelly alongside my partner, Alex Rodriguez. All right, so we're here in New York City at Bloomberg Invest. We're literally minutes away from taping a live interview in front of an audience with Melody Hobson, one of the most influential sports investors these days. So much to get into. You're going to hear that later on in the season. But one of her most interesting investments to me, and I think to you, is One Volleyball. This is a startup league. They're going youth to pro. We got a chance to sit down a couple weeks ago with their CEO and co-founder, Katlyn Gao. And I know one of the things that really jumped out to you was this vast experience she had in the consumer world.
Exactly, Jayson. I was so impressed with her background. When you look at Lululemon, Sephora, Bain, I mean, that's as good as it gets. I was really interested and curious to see how she was going to take all that great experience and weave it into building out this great league that she wants it to be global.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and we talked about this in the episode. I had gotten a chance to go down to Atlanta, see their first serve, they called it, the very first match they played as pros. It was electric in this arena, same arena that the Atlanta Dream play in. And, you know, it speaks to a lot of things we talk about on this show. This moment that's more than a moment, it's a movement for women's sports, all this enthusiasm. You know, you see it with the links, you see it with other investments that you have. So much emphasis and so much money going toward women's sports right now.
I think our listeners are going to be as impressed as you and I were. And after this interview, I'm very bullish in her vision for this league.
All right, coming up, Katlyn Gao. So we're really, really excited to have with us Katlyn Gao. She's the CEO, co-founder of One Volleyball. We know it as Love. I was there, Alex, for the first serve in the ATL. They're in the midst of their inaugural season. It's super exciting. How's it going so far?
I think you're seeing me with all of the excitement and adrenaline pumping up the lack of sleep. So that's how I'm doing.
Yeah, a seminal moment for me, Katlyn, it was a few years back, and I was watching on SportsCenter, and I was watching University of Nebraska, and they played volleyball outdoors. And I read 91,000 people, and I thought it was a typo or something. And you selected 6 obsessed markets with volleyball: Atlanta, Austin, Houston, Madison, Omaha, and Salt Lake. Why those markets, and where do you see this expanding to other cities?
Great question, because this being the #1 team sport for girls across the U.S. in terms of size of participation, the sky's the limit in terms of how far this can go, how many teams we can have ultimately as we build the NBA volleyball. To start with those 6, it was really important for us to really look at a lot of different factors, whether it's the collegiate programs, like you mentioned. Obviously, Nebraska was a no-brainer given how many people showed up. It was record-breaking for any women's sports event. And for us to also look at what are the other dynamics of youth participation, of venue availability, of the types of venues we felt very strongly about, as well as also looking at who are the top players in the world that are from the U.S. And for us to see, where do they come from? What communities have they already resonated with while they were playing college or while they were playing at the junior club level? And because we have now 71 junior club locations across 27 states, it was also for us to see how can we have a built-in foundation and that connection, at our own junior clubs so that we could even physically house them together in terms of where they're training, so that that Premier League type of youth to pro connection can be super authentic, very grassroots and natural.
All right, let's talk about the youth to pro, because it's a huge differentiator, and really this inaugural season has been about the pro league. It's the inaugural season of the pro league. You've been in the youth business. That is no small feat. It was the idea from the beginning. How much risk was there in your estimation as you sort of built this out? You built out the business case of sort of taking on an entire sport vertically.
Interestingly, for us, we really just focused on the size of what the sport already is, the unique nature of it being the sport that kind of was naturally women-led in both participation as well as how well known it is in terms of consumption. And while we really evaluated what the space could be, it felt extremely underserved. So you have this dichotomy of the participation level being so high and not having necessarily sort of the NBA of volleyball at the pro level. And at the youth level, it was extremely fragmented. There are about 5,000 plus of these junior clubs that exist in the US, and they're all sort of separated. There's not really a ton of scale, if you will. And what that comes with is lack of investment and sometimes consistency. And so it was really very early on, before we probably even came up with the name Love, that we felt very strongly that the entire sport was under-commercialized and the fans were underserved. And so for us to start with youth was actually quite natural because that's where the most vibrant participation and consumption already existed. And we felt very strongly that that could also present in this opportunity to build an entire brand for the entire ecosystem that creates, as I mentioned, this journey of belonging from youth to pro, and to purposely say, no, we're not starting with pro. I mean, you guys come across so many different startup leagues, right? And a lot of times they're rushing into something at the pro level without having had the luxury or the benefit of building it layer by layer, step by step, brick by brick. That does sometimes lead into an unsustainability. And for us to really kind of corral this foundation of a network of clubs that have this day in, day out consumption at the youth level just created this huge opportunity for us to drive lifetime consumption of volleyball as opposed to just one part of it.
Yeah, so Katlyn, one of the things with my background, I spent the first half of my life with Major League Baseball that's been around for over 100 years. I think the back nine hopefully will be a lot of NBA that's been around for over 75 years. Now, these are two blue chip companies. You're the epitome of blue chip with your background, Northwestern, undergrad, Harvard Business School, then you go to Sephora, Bain, Lululemon. How do you think about blue chip companies that we just mentioned compared to a starter? And what do you have to do a little bit different to grab people's attentions, investors, et cetera?
Well, first off, thank you. I think that we have this intentionality of building Love as a legacy league. And the characteristics of legacy leagues are they're here to stay. They weather the storm. They weather the up and downs. And I think that has to be built off of a really strong foundation. And that was exactly the justification, if you will, or the inspiration to say, we have an opportunity to do this in a way that felt very grounded, very disciplined, because we have a very clear vision of this being a legacy league. Success would be that this outlasts all of us, right? This isn't just one person's league or here the co-founding team. No, this is about each of us are here, and the time that we're here, we're creating it to be even stronger so that it outlasts for generations. So there are kids get to experience it the way that they get to experience the Bulls. I mean, I grew up in Chicago, and my identity is deeply rooted in the 90s Chicago Bulls. And so, however, the success or lack of success has been, I could be in London and I see somebody in a Bulls jersey and I want to go up and talk to them because we share something that is emotional, that's about a sense of belonging and identity. And so I think that all startup leagues should be thinking about what is the legacy you're creating and how do you create that legacy in a sustainable way? And I think that intentionality is really coming through both in terms of what we have done in 5.5 years of building this youth and junior club foundation, as well as having the patience and the luxury, if you will, of being in discussion with our founding athletes, starting when they were still in Tokyo or getting prepped for Tokyo Games, to say, we're building a league together. We're going about this differently. Would you like to come along for this ride? And how would you like to give us the input to say, if you were building a league with that youth to pro mindset, this whole journey of belonging consumption, how would you do it? And many of them were already situated in Europe where they see that youth to pro connection already playing out in front of their eyes.
Yeah, Katlyn, you mentioned something, and I saw this when I went to First Serve in Atlanta, sort of the emotional reaction that these athletes have had to a league being built where there wasn't one before. And it's almost like a thought exercise for you, Alex, to essentially be like, so you're playing baseball, but there is no MLB, and so like you have to go abroad to make your living. And then all of a sudden someone says, you know what, we're going to create Major League Baseball. You can play in Miami. Like, it's a little mind-bending to think about, but that, I mean, Katlyn, am I right? I mean, that was essentially what was happening with these athletes who would go and they'd play in Nebraska in front of 91,000 people, but then to be a pro, they'd have to go live in Russia, right?
Yes, that was mind-boggling to me even, 5.5 years ago, because Team USA, women's indoor team, has medaled 20 years in a row. They're the best in the world.
Wow.
And so you go from Nebraska in these incredible collegiate settings, and then boom, you're gone. You're off to Turkey, Italy, Russia, Korea, Japan, Brazil, but you're not here. Certainly not at the level where, we have 90% of our athletes represent their own countries, right? So that's national
in the
team
Olympics,
level.
right?
In the Olympics, exactly. So as well as the equivalent of World Cups, right? That happen every year. And so when you think about that level, and especially for the predominantly US players that are in our league, that's like you're playing at the NBA level, but there isn't an NBA. So you play abroad in other leagues for other countries. And then every year for the World Cup equivalent, or every 4 years, you're coming back during your breaks to say, I want to represent my country. But we don't have an opportunity for all these athletes to be playing together in their home soil. So Dream Team goes and wins medals coming back, and there's no NBA level. Now, there are other leagues, obviously, since we started this at the youth level that have entered the space, but certainly not at the same level of play as these Olympians, where 90% of them are representing their home country. And now they're coming and playing the NBA volleyball here in the U.S.
Yeah, I guess my next question is part statement, part question. But do you think that part of what has you so excited is the tailwinds? I mean, think about where we are today in 2025 versus even 30 years ago. My parents would never take my sister to a ball game, right? It was just me and my buddies. And today, I couldn't imagine any of my friends just taking their boys to a Miami Heat game or a Miami Dolphin. It's always the boys and the girls, they all go together. Do you think that the fan base, the consumer, the tailwinds, the WNBA, all of this is in your favor as far as storytelling, capital raising, et cetera?
Absolutely true that this has been an amazing tailwind. Also true that 5.5 years ago, this wasn't exactly what you see today. So we really have benefited from that since then. But the idea, the vision, the start of our execution of building the strong foundation, that came from us just looking around and saying, wow, we have this incredibly popular sport that is completely underserved. What can we do about it with a purpose and profit approach in mind of helping drive better life outcomes through the commercial success that we can create? So this is an added bonus, and one that's really, I think, overdue and so exciting. I think a lot of it is driven from a lot of the levers that you guys talk about on this show: disaggregation of media, new patterns of consumption, the recognition from brands that women's sports in particular represents a really creative and very uniquely compelling way for brands to come in and build that affinity with the audience that are watching women's sports, so that that partnership really becomes less of, just eyeballs and broad-based recognition, but a lot of depth and building that relationship with the fans for the sponsors/partners of these incredible leagues.
All right, so let's get into the deal of it all, as it were, and talk about, putting this together as a business. And then, you and your partners, and I think especially Peter Hirschman, going out on the road and raising money for this. Like, how do you even, start that process of knowing who you're going to talk to, knowing how you're going to approach, what the pitch is going to be? Take us inside those early days.
Yes, it seems like forever ago, but really it's just been 5.5 years of 3 rounds of fundraising with some really—
It's still 5.5 years. I mean, that's not a short amount of time.
It's not. And it's been really an incredible experience of meeting folks along the way that, even if it's initially not the right timing for what their investment thesis is, that over time, as they watch us execute on what we have laid out years ago, I do believe that that creates a sense of trust. It creates a sense of confidence in your ability to set a really strong and ambitious vision. As you mentioned, Jayson, not everyone decides to take on, two really robust areas of opportunity here, both at the junior level as well as at the pro level, and all the other things that can come of it once you have those two very important cornerstones set, which we now do 5.5 years later. So I'd say that we've never wavered around our sequencing of foundation first, then the halo of the brand next, which is at the pro level. And that journey has been one that has been very purposely laid out in very sort of structured fashion of what are all the milestones we want to hit. And so for having that laid out very clearly and not deviating from it, and it kind of just makes sense when you're thinking about driving lifetime consumption and you start with youth and you go into pro next with the best possible quality of play on the court. All of that, I think, made a lot of sense, especially for folks that really look at it not just as a pure sports opportunity, but one that's really driving a holistic consumption opportunity. So, it's as much of an entertainment product as it is a competition product, a training product, and now merchandising has become a big component of how we're engaging with our fans because we've taken a very lifestyle as well as competitive approach on what we're offering in our sort of budding program of merchandising where you're actually wearing the league name in addition to having the team names opportunities. You don't really see that in NWSL or the NFL or the NBA. That comes sort of next, well below kind of where your fan base typically engage at, which is at the team level. And we think that there's an opportunity for us to create it where it can be at each level.
So, Katlyn, I'm fascinated by this question I'm going to ask you, and I think our listeners will be too. If you think about, you've raised, as I understand, $160 million over 3 rounds of raising capital. Let's just divide them into 3 silos, 3 buckets. You have institutional capital, you have family offices, and then you have celebrities/athletes. I guess my question to you is, what's the contrast? Or is it better yet, like one size fits all? Or is it more of a tailor-made approach, the way you contrast institutional versus family offices versus celebrities, athletes?
It's a really good question because we've experienced different indexing of those 3 categories depending on the rounds, right? Earlier rounds, in terms of the capital that you need, it doesn't really hit the radar of some of the larger growth equity or even above that in terms of kind of middle of the road, if you will, private equity firms. And that's really more of a mechanical differentiation. But I think in terms of, what folks are looking for in their investment, both from celebrities, so individuals, family offices to institutional capital, interestingly, I actually don't think there's a huge difference. I think it's an appetite for risk and the stage. But in terms of what they're actually looking for, they're typically all looking for a really sizable market, right? It's the size of the addressable market, and we have a huge one. They're also looking for, what is your business model? What is the talent on the team? You mentioned Peter Hirschman. He and I met at Bain many years ago. We also have Kevin Wong, who has lived and breathed for decades. He himself is an Olympian on the beach side, but started with indoor and also, broadcast on NBC for the beach Olympics. And that's just symbolic of all of the people that we've corralled, both on the working team, as well as added benefit of these incredible youth club directors and owners who have come into love and helping us build all of this. And all of that is information, networks, and access to capital conversations. And so for us, it was actually more so that we are being really clear about what our end vision is, but the fact that you can't actually get there overnight. Nothing breakthrough happens overnight, but it's really this methodical approach of what are we doing this year? How are we thinking about the launch in 4 years? And having a ton of those conversations with the athletes, with the club directors, with the national team coaches to really get the benefit of all of that brain trust. And I think that's what was reflected in all of our pitches is a diversity of connections in and outside of volleyball, in and outside of sports. and the fact that we're very intentional about the Love brand.
And a quick follow-up there. I see some of your noteworthy investors, Lindsey Vonn, the great Candace Parker that was on the deal, Amy Schumer. These are as big as names as you can find. Are you pitching usually to the business manager, or do they actually make an appearance? And if they do make an appearance, do they ask questions?
They ask incredibly insightful questions because they have the lived experience of being in highly pressurized environments. They've seen a ton of these pitches come across their desks, and the celebrities themselves, the high-profile folks themselves, as well as their business teams. And we welcome that because they all have, collectively really great insights. When you take Candace Parker or even Jayson Tatum, for example, they all have real personal connections to the sport. Candace Parker had played volleyball very competitively until she was a sophomore. And I think some sort of negotiation or conversation happened with her and her dad. It's like, you got to pick one because you're going to be playing at the highest level. And it's too bad that Love wasn't around. We didn't have the NBA or the WNBA of volleyball for her to play in. And Jayson Tatum's mom actually was already on her way to a D1 scholarship. And she has a really kind of deep connection with the sport. And she was really, really competitive in that sport. So there's family connections to the sport in Jayson's case. So Amy Schumer played volleyball. And I think actually in her show, she has a character that plays volleyball. So there is so much incredibly sort of genuine connection to the sport, so that there is sort of this, I'm going to zoom out and hear what this unique opportunity is, not just in the investment, but what you're trying to create and the impact for the sport that is both for purpose and for profit. So we're very fortunate to have that level of connection to our investors in general.
Yeah, wow, Alex, I mean, it's a sliding doors thing. I mean, just think the entire Candace Parker episode of The Deal could have been about her being this generational talent in volleyball. I mean, unbelievable.
Exactly.
It is amazing. I mean, as we were going through this, I did note to Alex that you have a lot of members of what we call the Deal cinematic universe. And on your cap table, you have Candace Parker, you have Billie Jean King and Alana. You have, I believe, Carolyn Tish Blodgett and Next 3 as part of your investor group as well, all who have appeared on The Deal, just to be clear. So clearly we're doing the right thing because we're talking to very smart investors and athletes turned investors. I wonder how we got to that. I mean, oh yeah, right. Alex Rodriguez. I forgot about it. I forgot we have the OG as one of the hosts. Silly me.
Luck and talent. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. But it is interesting to think about, sort of how they got there. But, one thing that I wanted to make sure we talked about a little bit, Katlyn, is sort of how you got here. We touched on it a little bit. And I do wonder, as you reflect on this, almost 6 years into this journey, Alex mentioned your educational pedigree of the highest level, but also working in consumer brands like Sephora and Lululemon, consulting with Bain. What are your reflections on sort of this moment in your career? Because I think about a lot of our listeners who they dream of doing something like this. They're working for big companies they may admire, but, to go out and start something new in sports, there's this, movement afoot of understanding the role that sports plays in the broader culture. Have you even had a minute to sort of reflect on that for yourself?
Only recently, I would say, having had the opportunity to reflect on it. And it really kind of comes down to this not necessarily being, what do the kids say these days? This was not in my bingo card.
Yeah.
This was not in my bingo card. I am not a Alex Rodriguez level, not even close. Wasn't D1 bound for any sport. But maybe I'll come back to this idea of, I really think of sports as a business of belonging. I came to the States at age 12. My mother being the reason that we moved to the States. She was a physicist, and her job has, taken us a very, very drastic turn from a life that I would have lived and my brother and myself would have lived if we stayed in China. So her role, her profession really changed the trajectory of our family's lives. And, to this day, I think that has been a very strong impact in how I think about what that purpose with the capital P would be. I'm still thinking about what I do when I grow up. And along the way, having had the great opportunities that I've had in both educational as well as professional settings, you just meet incredible people. And those relationships, once you start to get into a certain stage in your career, you're starting to connect the dots. And then also being a little bit more clear about what are the things that motivate you. And to me, this idea of being involved in a business that is really about a business of belonging, and that's brought me so much joy, just being a fan of basketball growing up in Chicago in the 90s. Again, not a great athlete myself, but felt like despite the language barrier, I was able to feel a sense of belonging by trying out different sports, because you actually didn't even need the verbal communication to feel belonging with your teammates. And that's the sense of purpose that we think about in driving and building love. And I'm just really grateful that relationships got, this group of great founders coming together, and that, I've been part of really driving a legacy creation that will hopefully outlast all of us.
So sticking with you, Katlyn, as you think about your great career that you've had, going back to Harvard Business School, Bain, Sephora, Lululemon, which of those four do you think you drew the most experience to help create love?
I've actually never thought of it that way, because so much of it is really the culmination of all of it. But perhaps one that stuck out at the time that we were deciding what is the business model. Because it's very easy to just say, well, all these startup leagues start with pro. And then you go back and you make the connection for fan base or for other reasons into the youth. And starting with youth, this idea of grassroots up first really came from the most recent exposure that I had by running global e-commerce at Lululemon, where I was maybe even shocked to find that there wasn't a marketing department per se. It was really labeled community. It was all about getting the community to corral around this brand. And so it was a lot more about depth than it was about breadth. And that was very different than a lot of other certain athletic brands or other mega brands that have done a lot more emphasis on tops down marketing as opposed to grassroots up marketing. The example I would give is that in many cases, especially in the early years, Lululemon started with really a Pilates studio, for example, maybe even a makeshift one that was only a 6-month short-term rental. And that's how they developed new markets or new neighborhoods, where they would bring in influencers from those particular neighborhoods just so that they could, yes, be doing yoga together, Pilates, but then there's a rack of clothes from Lululemon where you're getting input, you're getting to know their life stories and what functions do they care about, down to by the time that they do open the permanent space, what do you see on the wall? You see actually local influencers. You see local heroes in, various walks of the sporting life. And the run clubs still meet there at 6 a.m. in the morning. Regionally, they also had people who engaged with the community specifically so that they're drawing into the grassroots influence as opposed to tops down and pure digital marketing. So we felt very strongly, especially sort of digging a little bit deeper into what are the relevant learnings there that, I think that helped us to double down on this grassroots up approach.
That's so interesting. One thing that strikes me is you talk about, the business of belonging. And, the other thing that I really do feel like I witnessed there in Atlanta, one, and Alex, you'll drive with this, one was sort of the support from the broader Atlanta sports community. It's like the president of the Atlanta Dream is there, and Derek Schiller, the CEO of the Atlanta Braves, like they're there sort of showing support, which was interesting to sort of see the sports ecosystem. But also, and I think this goes all the way back to the question of like why these certain markets, there was such a sense of sort of joy and anticipation and excitement in the arena that evening from the fans. And I do wonder, Katlyn, as we start to wrap up the conversation, like, what are you taking from the fans? You have developed this community and sort of plugged into it in a way from the club and the youth level. But what do you take away from the fans, and how does that inform where you take the league from here? What have you learned so far from the people who are, in the seats?
The most important lesson we're learning is that if you are true to your intentionality of building a community, anything is possible. And that community is a community of youth clubs and their families. We had close to 19,000 athletes and their families in our junior clubs, and that's expected to double probably in the next year and a half, and it goes from there, as well as us having had this intentionality of engaging with the collegiate programs and their athletes and their coaches, engaging with other sports. I mean, ultimately, the power really is in the community. Why? Because relationships built, dots connected, fans activated. All of those pieces, I think, validate the fact that starting with the community up was absolutely the right choice, even if it wasn't a choice that many others have or anyone else has ever made. It felt right for volleyball in particular. I mean, this is a sport where your opponents are on the other side of the net. You've got 6 starters on one side of the net choreographing the most beautiful plays, right? And it's really a special sport where it's deeply rooted in that sense of belonging and coming together. I mean, win or lose, they come together for each point to encourage each other. So it's being true to who we are. It's always been about community. That's what, I think the power will continue to be as we continue to grow.
All right, so should we hit the lightning round, Alex?
Yes, let's do it.
You ready? Okay.
I am.
5 questions. The only thing we say is keep it tight, and we'll bounce it back and forth. I'll start, and then Alex will pick it up. Are you ready?
Let's go.
No pressure. All right.
No pressure.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever received on deal making or business?
Being authentic, being true to who you are, and tune out the noise.
Who's your dream deal-making partner?
Oh, I already have it. My co-founding team.
So maybe someone you haven't worked with yet, but you sort of imagine working with.
Oh, man. That is an interesting Beyonce.
Ooh.
Oh, that's
Good
a
one.
great answer. That could be the best answer we've gotten to that question.
I think so.
All right.
I'm also manifesting, if you can't tell.
Yeah.
That's what we do
Listen,
at the deal.
I love
exactly. We love deals that start on the deal. What's the most nervous you've ever been, Katlyn?
it. The weekend before first serve.
What's your hype song before you go into a big meeting or a negotiation?
Not a very cool one, but I Want to Dance with Somebody by Whitney Houston.
Oh, that's good. That's a good one. And what's your advice for someone who might be listening who wants to do what you've done?
Take care of the relationships you have. Be intentional about developing those with people you admire and connect the dots.
All right. Really good. I think that could be the best lightning round we've ever done. Sorry, everyone else who's been on the show. Katlyn Gao, this was a treat. I had been really looking forward to this, especially since we got to spend some time together at the first serve. Really, really fun. Excited for what you're building and can't wait to see where it goes from here. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you both. Great to be here.
Thank you. And I can't wait to go to a match. I'm excited.
Yeah, you
Please
got to go.
do.
It's such a vibe. It's such a vibe. It's so fun.
Alex, we're trying to get you guys to our finals in Kentucky. So Louisville on April 13th is our finals.
Okay.
So that'll be
Thank you.
just as exciting, if not more so, than our first serve.
You got it.
The Deal is hosted by Alex Rodriguez and me, Jayson Kelly. This episode was made by Anna Mazarakis, Stacy Wong, and Lizzie Phillip. Amy Keene is our editor. Our theme music is made by Blake Maples. Our executive producers are Kelly LaFerriere, Ashley Honig, and Brendan Newnham. Sage Bauman is the head of Bloomberg Podcasts. Additional support from Rachel Carnevale and Elena Sasangelis. Thanks so much for listening to The Deal. If you have a minute, subscribe, rate, and review our show. It'll help other listeners find us. I'm Jayson Kelly. See you next week.